Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Renewables, Taking Off in Africa After COVID-19. My name is Arne Doornebal. I'm your presenter for today. I work with the Netherlands African Business Council. We're glad you have all joined. Please, in case you have any technical difficulties, let us know via email or via chat, and my colleague Koen will help you. We have a great lineup of speakers today. We have entrepreneurs, we have experts, some are both, of course. We have international organizations. We're joined by Dutch Development Bank FMO. We're joined by Irena. We're joined by the COCLA, and then we have entrepreneurs from Leadwood Energy, Amphibious Energy, and Aprisolar with us today. I saw on the attendance list we also have a high delegation joining us from the Embassy of Namibia. A very warm welcome to you. But let me start by introducing Rosmarijn Fens. She's been with NABC for the last 3 years. She became our managing director in January this year. Welcome, Rosmarijn.
Good morning. Thank you, Arne, and welcome to all of you to this webinar. This is in fact the first webinar, or the African Business Club, or ABC as we call it, that I'm opening since becoming the managing director of NABC. And I am pleased that it is on such a crucial topic as renewable energy, not only important to stop climate change and to save our planet, but also a driver of economic growth everywhere, and certainly in Africa. There has been so much focus lately on renewable energy and the environment, also during the recently concluded Dutch elections. Almost all parties agreed that we have to change our behavior after COVID-19, certainly when it comes to energy. There's no other choice than making a drastic shift towards using renewables and to make sure we reach the goals set by the Paris Agreement. 2021 is actually a very special year for the Netherlands African Business Council, since we celebrate our 75th years of existence. When we were founded, right after World War II, a visionary banking from Rotterdam called Karel Paul van der Mandela, he decided there was a need to start trading with the world in order to overcome the war. And although from a different order, we also feel that right now, when we are hopefully approaching the COVID-19 pandemic, cooperation and working together are important tools to get us out of this crisis. NABC has been focusing on long-term programs in recent years, when we coordinate multi-year programs with a group of companies from the same sector or different sectors to jointly enter the African market, to share risk and to increase impact. And we will also be exploring a possibility of consortium of companies with the renewable energy, within the renewable energy sector. So in case you have a good idea for a project or a program that would involve more than only your company, then please reach out to us and we can help jointly establishing a group of companies around a certain theme. My colleague Arne urged me to keep it short, as we have a virtual room full of experts from the Netherlands and Africa to give us more insights on renewable energy. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you for now, and I wish you a successful webinar.
Thank you very much, Rosmarijn. Let's now hear from our first speaker, Ms. Maite Pina Arques. She works as a senior investment officer at the Dutch Development Bank FMO and is part of the team that looks at renewable energy in Africa. Ms. Pina, you're welcome. Could you briefly tell us about FMO's recent involvement in the renewable energy sector in Africa?
Thank you, Arne. I think probably first of all, a little bit just to introduce myself, right? Just so that people know a little bit more. I've been with FMO for the last 3 years, and I moved to the Netherlands 5 years ago from the UK, where I spent 18 years working in the energy sector. So I've been involved in African businesses since 2008, even from the developer expectations as well, looking at landfill to power and biofuels at that time. And now, you know, I've been looking from both sides, on the developer side and the financial side. So I think it's a really nice way to look at the sector. And yes, from FMO perspective, as you know, the Dutch Development Bank has been in operation since in the 70s, early 70s. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. And we started investing in renewable energy around 2007, 2008. Our portfolio in Africa is around 4 billion today, out of the 12 billion in our balance sheet. of which we have around 500 million investing in renewable energy and clean energy investment, more or less directly and indirectly as well through some of the funds. I mean, the last year has not been easy, let's face it, right? So we have been facing COVID and of course some capacity shortages internally, having to deal with some of our entrepreneurs and developers having some issues. But we have seen as well a delay on some of the projects, but we were able to close some of the transactions and seen some markets, movement around the West Africa, a little bit more extent than other regions, for example.
Okay, thank you. So that's an impressive amount, 500 million euros of, is it euros or dollars investment in?
Euros.
Euros.
Plus, yeah, it's included as well some of our indirect investments in funds and that are investing in debt. That is practically on our debt portfolio only. It doesn't include the equity.
I see. And what are the regions which you're mainly targeted? Where do you see the most potential for this kind of energy?
It is moving all across, right? I mean, South African market has been seeing the largest penetration of renewable energy over the last 10, 15 years. However, this is a market that is now for commercial banks. And I think from FMO perspective, our value added is not for the simple renewable energy projects, but by those that bring a value added, like with batteries and so on. We have seen as well quite a bit of development in Namibia over the last few years with 2 IPP projects coming on. The opening of the market for the private sector as well. And as well, Botswana has as well a tender in place for 2 projects of 50 megawatt each. Eswatini as well has solar PV tenders. Madagascar has a substantial potential with hydro. Mozambique, outside the gas power plant that is currently being developed, there are quite a few potential projects in wind and solar. Zambia, huge potential, but current situation is making it really difficult. West Africa is actually everywhere. The thing is that in some regions it takes a bit longer to develop, probably than in other regions. Burkina Faso, the development has been exceptional over the last 2 years. We're going to close potentially almost 4 projects in less than 2 years. From not having anything, it's just been. There are countries which are moving at a really fast pace. I think that what has helped substantially has been the drop in prices for solar PV panels related equipment. We have seen prices going below the 1 million per megawatt installed in Africa. We have seen tenders where prices has gone as low as in Namibia below the 3 cents. Whether this is financially feasible in the long term, because it doesn't really allow for any mistakes, that is to be seen. We have seen as well a lot of interest from financiers. So yeah, I think I would say that Africa is still a hot market and there's substantial potential. However, it's not only about renewables, right? We have to connect it to the grid. So we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there and that the power can be uptaken by the systems.
Exactly. And you mentioned already a couple of the developments, for example, the fact that the solar, eventually the prices have dropped, which make it more easy. You also mentioned 2020 has not been, of course, an easy year. Is there anything you can say about what the current pandemic is going to mean in the coming year? I mean, do you think it will make governments more eager to invest in renewables?
Well, I think this is going to be on a country by country basis. Like we have to be honest, the balance of payment has been affected. This is something, a global pandemic, which substantially is impacting the economic markets, in the access and availability of these countries to as well undertake some contingent liabilities on their balance sheet, right? So they normally provide guarantees to large IPPs, whether they can continue doing so as well, it's going to have an effect in the market. The second aspect as well is that, how much is the demand going to be affected, right? So, I mean, there is a lot of potential, but we need to make sure that there is demand there, availability to pay for that power, and actually infrastructure to support that power, right? Solar PV prices has done substantially. However, there is a lot of intermittence within the solar PV. We need to install batteries. We need to make sure that we understand how batteries works better. and that we make them bankable, because I believe that going forward, we cannot develop solar PV plants per se. We need to make sure that all of them include some batteries and storage. And as well to see how much intermittency that the system can support. There are some markets which are getting congested already, and to develop new solar PV or any other in type of intermittent renewable energy will need some, let's say, what we call the base load power, right? The non-intermittent 24/7 available power, which through batteries, which is quite expensive, or is through fossil fuels, right? So we need to be a bit conscious, right? So renewable energy is the way forward, but I mean, how much can the system support? As I said, we're seeing a lot of opportunities coming in West Africa, quite a bit in the southern markets, but it's taking me longer. I think hydro reservoir provide, of course, what is the 24/7 access. However, there is a lot of environmental and social issues that concern large infrastructure development, as the hydropower plants, and yeah, that is to be seen, right? But I mean, we are FMO, we're getting out of fossil fuels. We will only do gas in exceptional cases, and we are betting for just renewable energy, and not only renewable energy, but as well, if we want to provide access to 600 million people in Africa, we need to move to the distributed energy sector, or the off-grid, right? So we have been investing over the last few years in solar consistent sector. We have been starting to look at mini grid sector, which we believe is one of the solutions to at least electrify 300 to 100 million people.
Exactly, because you already mentioned the mini grids also when we prepared for this webinar. How important do you see the role of mini grids or smaller grids rather than to have the national grid, and how is that reflected in the investments of FMO?
Well, in the investment figure, it's quite small still, Arne, let's be honest. I think the investments taking a long time to develop. We have 2 investments quite advanced. I cannot mention the names because of confidentiality reasons. And we have a pipeline of another 6 to 7 investments. The amounts compared to a typical IPP where we were looking at 25, 30 million, here we're looking in some cases even below 5 million, right? Which for FMO based on transaction cost is quite high. So we're looking at the developers on the long term, right? In creating long-term partnerships and helping them to develop multiple mini grids. There is key markets like Nigeria, Congo, Angola, and Zambia that has a substantial market potential. And in my view, but that's a little bias, I think that we should focus as well a little more on mini grids to provide at least access to power to 200 million people in Africa through mini grids and solar home systems, so the distributed energy sector at least.
Thank you. And is there anything you can say about the type of projects that you have in the pipeline for 2021? What can we expect in the coming months in the markets?
Well, we have seen some hydropower plants coming out in like region in Madagascar, for example. In Zambia, there is some hydro, but I don't know how much is going to be developed. Some project in West Africa as well for hydro. But as I said, those projects take much longer because of environmental and social, well, not issues, but actually, it's kind of, it's quite cumbersome to analysis that have to be undertaken. It takes 1 to 2 years to do a proper SAP for this project and understand the impact that this project might cause, right, to balance them. But I think the technology that has taken off substantially is solar PV. I mean, we have seen wind, but mainly in Northern Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we see wind, but it's mainly in South Africa and a little bit in Zambia and Mozambique. But yeah, nowadays, I think solar PV is so cheap that everybody is focusing in developing solar PV plants.
Okay, exactly. Thanks a lot for that. One last question. In the meantime, I actually see people are using the chat already, which is good. Please keep doing that. Do you already have a feeling that 2021 is going to see a big increase if you compare that to the projects of last year?
Unfortunately, I think one thing that I haven't touched, right, is on the due diligence. In many cases, not even for due diligence, but for projects to be developed, people need to be able to go to the sites, engineers, and there have been some constraints, right? Some constraints on the pipeline, in the supplies as well. Some constraints as well, having meetings with governments, with other institutions, and with projects has been taking much longer than expected. always a project takes much longer than expected, right? But it has been impacted substantially by COVID situation. But I'm quite positive that, within Q3, Q4, we will start seeing a bit more ramping up when, travel, potentially people just feel a bit safer with the vaccines, Q3 and so on, Q4, we will see things moving forward again. And we have as well been overwhelmed with the pipeline that we have already and to support our current clients as well, that we have not been able to take new projects either to look at, right? So we're trying to focus in get to that deadline with the ones that we have today. We as well want to support not only the public-private partnerships with the government, large IPP, but also the private sector, so which I think is quite key in this, and that's another area we're focusing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Maite, Pina, Arques. We're now going to the next speaker, who is joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. It's Miss Elsie Mbugua. She's the founder of Leadwood Energy and Elcy Investments Limited, and she previously worked as an energy trader at JP Morgan in the United States. And now she's advising, among others, the Kenyan government on energy matters. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Yeah, so thank you, Arne. I think thank you to the Netherlands African Business Council for having me on, and to the listeners as well. It's really an honor to be able to join you guys on this call today.
Great, thank you. Could you share with us some of the recent development you're seeing, particularly in the East African market?
Yeah, so I would say the power sector has made tremendous gains over the past several years. Just in terms of developing adequate generation capacity, we have rapid enhancement of electricity access. We're seeing an expansion to our power transmission and distribution infrastructure. And just to kind of give you a sense of where we are, I think at December 2020, the total installed generation capacity, and this is for Kenya, was about 2,700. Our peak demand back in 2014, 2015 was around the 1,500 range, and now we are already up to almost 2,000 megawatts as of December. We currently have the largest wind farm, Lake Turkana, which has about 310 megawatts. And even during COVID, we saw an uptick. We saw the Kipeto wind farm come on with an additional 100 megawatts. It's important to note that obviously Kenya is known to have one of the most stable utilities on the continent and quite a robust sort of power sector. And we're starting to, we see tremendous growth. We are aware, I think for those that follow that market, there's a lot of ongoing restructuring with our utility at the moment. But there's still also tremendous growth within mini grid and off-grid markets, thanks to mobile money, M-Pesa. And that's the same for the other East African countries as well. They continue to grow, especially in solar, and we're seeing a lot of realignment of policies within the region by the governments to attract foreign investors, especially in Uganda and Ethiopia.
Exactly. And do you think to which extent has the COVID pandemic shifted away attention and maybe also money, from the urge to go for green solutions?
Yeah, I mean, so the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly put a strain on governments, on our institutions, also our way of life. And Kenya has certainly not been spared. I think what we saw is an unprecedented drop in energy demand. We saw the same everywhere across the world. And I think, it was quite a struggle for our utility because, with a drop in energy demand, you still are liable for a lot of the capacity payments from the various IPPs. I mean, and obviously you saw that, we do have a surplus in terms of capacity. So that was certainly a strain on our country's utility, Kenya Power. But what we've also seen is that there've been active conversations with the various IPPs to defer commissioning dates. Now, I wouldn't say that we have seen a push away from renewable. In fact, if anything, there's a concerted, feeling that we need to do more. I think what it has done is that it's exacerbated the system issues in our power sector. And I see this as an opportunity actually to have a stronger utility. So issues around demand creation. Kenya's manufacturing sector, its contribution to GDP has remained the same since, our country got independence. So there's a lot more that we need to do as a country, as investors, as entrepreneurs working on the ground to grow the industrial customer base and also the associated energy consumption. I think what it also showed is, we do have issues with supply reliability. Our system losses are still high. And more importantly, we need to figure out other ways to finance our supporting infrastructure. And I'm stressing privatization of transmission lines, which my firm has been, quite an advocate for. So if there are any investors on the call that have patient capital and are willing to earn an annuity, I'd certainly be keen to have a conversation around that.
I see. Thank you for that. And do you think, what are your predictions for 2021? Do you see it picking up again?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think the expectation is that in 2021, things will pick up again. I think it will be slow. So I think, just as I noted earlier, we are currently restructuring our utility. And so I think that has taken the primary bulk, sort of as a work item for the ministry and for our regulators. What we're seeing at the moment is that, there's a concern that we do need to manage a lot of the independent power producers or I guess potential investors or projects that had been given EOIs. And there's quite a number of them.
Sorry, EOIs, can you please explain that maybe for those of us who are not so familiar with the investment terms? You also mentioned IPPs earlier. Yeah,
so IPP is an independent power producer. And so generally, these would be the folks who have invested. These are the developers of the projects. And in Kenya, at least the way it works, and much of East Africa, you get into an agreement with the utility, which is a single off-taker. So the IPP would essentially be the generate electricity and then sell into the utility. And then now the utility is responsible for the transmission and the distribution, to the rest of the country. So both residential and industrial.
Thank you for that clarification. But you also told me when we discussed this matter before, your country still has a long way to go. When 75% of the people are still using charcoal and firewood for cooking, for example. Which important next steps are there to take in your view?
Yeah, so I think the thinking here when we are talking about charcoal or firewood for cooking is that first, the thinking here is that renewables will play a critical role in electricity expansion, right? The issues around the use of charcoal and firewood are being addressed by the adoption of liquefied petroleum gas. And that's LPG. That is a fossil fuel. So just to clarify that. At the moment, they are policy drivers. I think we recognize that there is a significant need to reduce the respiratory disease and the mortality rates that are associated with a lot of the indoor air pollution due to the use of firewood and charcoal, as well as deforestation. And what we've seen is that the country and the region as a whole, and I'll speak to Kenya because obviously I do live there, is that we did see an increase in the tax in kerosene in 2017. And then simultaneously, they lowered the tax on LPG. Now that was to promote the use of a cheaper cooking fuel. We've also seen a lot of heavy investment in cylinder factories, for example. I think at the moment we have 3. 2 of them happen to be foreign investors. There's a higher rate of available cylinders in the market, probably about 10 million of the smaller 6 kg cylinders. But more importantly, I think the government has been a keen advocate to increase bulk storage. At the moment, we have only 1 bulk storage importer. And so they're willing to roll the red carpet for any investor that's willing to come in and invest in storage. And it seems to be working because we do have a client who is just going through the permitting process to build out about 26,000 metric tons of LPG just in terms of an import facility in Mombasa. And our teams are fielding calls left, right, and center, both from banks and from other investors who are willing to come in and play in the game. So I just wanted to highlight, I think that the charcoal and the firewood story is a little bit different. And renewables is primarily for electrification and not for necessarily for cooking.
Right, but I mean also driving the point that for the foreseeable future, LPG gas solutions for are still very much needed in many parts of Kenya. Maybe briefly to finalize, what's going to be your main priority for the next next months, the next year?
Yeah, so I think our key concern again is ensuring that we are still maintaining the region and ensuring that it's still attractive for investments, especially foreign investments, because that has been the bedrock of financing for our sectors. I think at the moment what we're doing is that we are working with our Ministry of Energy, we're working with our regulator, just to encourage a harmonized voice, for folks who have worked in these sectors and in Kenya. I think sometimes what you find is perhaps the ministry, the regulator, and the utility do not have a harmonized voice. So there are different, signals sent to the market, and that certainly has, an impact on the appetite for risk in the country. So things like, when will we move from a feed-in tariff that we currently have right now, where the government tells you what the price is prior, and then you can negotiate, to something of an auction system, so you're bidding, and there's been mixed signals in terms of when that's, how that messaging has been delivered by various stakeholders in the government. We're working to enhance operational capabilities and also supporting the government in terms of thinking about better revenue collection. So installing smart meters, reinstating cost-reflective tariffs in the country, asking them to have to discuss and be upfront with the IPPs when they do have issues, rather than creating policies without the voice of the market. We are also supporting, and we will be supporting and being a champion in terms of reviewing some of the tax law amendments that were recently enacted in our energy bill that have not been very favorable to a lot of renewable investments, meaning that there's been a bit of a taxation added that was not there. So areas like solar have been, significantly affected. And then obviously we are quite central to restructuring the utility. We do understand that, with a single off-taker that we have at the moment, they are the bedrock of our power sector. So we will be supporting on a lot of the various restructuring opportunities that come
Exactly.
on.
Thank you so much, Asante Sana, Elcy
welcome.
Mbugua, live from Nairobi. Thank you so much. And if there are questions, Elcy, please put them in the chat or hold them so we can have the conversation after the other speakers. Thank you so much. We're now joined by Mr. Sebastian Sterl, who works for Irena, the International Renewable Energy Association, a global organization that is based in Abu Dhabi, but also have offices in Germany and in the United States. Welcome, Sebastian. Good morning.
Good morning, Arne. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Sebastian Sterl, and I work as an analyst in energy planning and modeling with a focus on the African continent at Irena, the International Renewable Energy Agency. Let me just start by giving you a short introduction of what Irena does globally, and then I'll go into a bit more detail concerning my and my team's work on energy modeling in Africa. So Irena is an intergovernmental organization, and our mandate is to support countries worldwide in transitioning to a renewable energy future. So we strive to be a platform and a center of excellence in terms of international cooperation in all matters related to renewable energy. And probably most importantly of all, we strive to be a repository for knowledge on renewables policy, on technologies, on resource assessments, on financing, and so on and so forth. Now, Irena promotes the widespread adoption and the sustainable use of all forms of renewable energy. We do not have a preference for a specific technology, so that concerns solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal, bioenergy, but also more marginal sources like ocean energy, for example. And our mission is to leverage renewables to support sustainable development worldwide, support energy access, increase energy security, and facilitate low carbon economic growth. So we have more than 180 countries actively engaged as member states of the agency or in accession to becoming full member states. Our headquarters are in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, but the Irena Innovation and Technology Center, where I work, is located in the beautiful city of Bonn in Germany. And since Irena has an observer status to the United Nations General Assembly, we also do have an office in New York. Now, let's go a bit more in depth on what me and my team do. So Irena does a lot of things, but in particular, what our team focuses on is energy planning support and capacity building within member state governments. And we have a very strong focus on the African continent there to build institutional capacity in energy planning. That means we provide trainings in the use of energy modeling tools and the use of renewable energy data to assist countries in developing energy scenarios to help, guide policy and provide visions to where the energy sectors could go. So concretely, that could mean support in the design of scenarios for contributing to long-term strategies, nationally determined contributions, or also energy sector master plans. So you can see a few examples here on the right-hand side of this slide. We always strive to base ourselves on the most recent science-based methodologies to reflect the potential of renewable energy in these master plans, as well as networking with other partners nationally and internationally. And the aim really is to provide tailored services to individual countries' needs. So the way you should imagine this is that a country could, let's say, call the proverbial helpline and say, we would like Irena's support in developing an energy sector master plan, and then we will do our best to support that member state. So a few more concrete details, for example, on the kinds of training programs we offer and their concepts and goals. The idea is really we provide workshops, hands-on practical workshops on the use of energy modeling tools, which are focused on identifying least cost options to meet future demand in energy, or more specifically as well in electricity. So that means we can perform technical analysis of energy and electricity supply and demand, technical evaluations of renewables potential, and always using the latest knowledge, especially on the declining costs of renewables. So if I may circle back a little bit to what Maite already introduced, countries obviously have different opportunities to expand their power generation. For example, we heard the example from Madagascar with hydro, or from Zambia with solar, a bit of wind, or from Burkina Faso with solar. And these modeling tools really serve to guide countries and to provide visions for what would be the most appropriate resources to develop to arrive at the lowest cost options, for example, of electricity generation, while meeting certain targets in terms of renewables penetration, for example. So we can do that by showcasing different scenarios with different ambition levels, which helps to clarify options to leverage this potential of renewables and lower greenhouse gas emissions. And we do have a very strong focus on the system integration of variable renewables that Maite also already alluded to. So this modeling can help us to clarify, well, if we have a country that has various resources, maybe solar, wind, hydropower, biomass, and gas, what is the most appropriate combination of these resources to help meet a burgeoning and increasing electricity supply on the medium and the long term, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and how roughly what will be the roles of these different resources? How can hydropower help to support solar power through its dispatchability? How can other thermal power plants, for example, maybe provide support to that? How are the complementarities between solar and wind? How is storage going to be necessary, and so on and so forth? So you can see an example here on the right hand side from an analysis we did in 2018 on power systems across West Africa, where we see, for example, that there is a huge potential to diversify away from hydropower and thermal power, which has been the status quo, towards renewable resources, such as here in the case of Mali, solar PV and also biomass. So the idea really is to strengthen nationally present capacity in these countries, such that these kind of modeling exercises can afterwards be done by the countries themselves, by the institutions. Sometimes these training programs last relatively shortly, for several months, for example, in supporting nationally determined contributions to be submitted to the UNFCCC for the worldwide climate conferences. In some cases, it may also take several years of accompanying a country, for example, in developing a renewables master plan. So we just to give you some examples, we have supported or are still supporting Eswatini, Sierra Leone, and Cameroon in the development of national master plans for the energy sector or for renewable energy more specifically. We are supporting various countries with capacity building for the energy elements in their nationally determined contributions on climate change, such as Gabon, Niger, Mali, Cameroon, and Eswatini as well. That's work that is currently in the process of being finalized. And we also take a more region-wide or continent-wide view in developing science-based analysis for the different power pools that are already interconnected or are to be interconnected in the future. North African Power Pool, West African Power Pool, Central African Power Pool, as well as the African Clean Energy Corridor, which is the Eastern African and Southern African Power Pool. So there we bring representatives from the different countries utilities together in the framework of these power pools and provide comparable trainings. Now, in terms of COVID-19, obviously that has had some impact on our work, but I'm quite proud to say that we've been able to shift to a digitally based capacity building in response to the sanitary crisis that is still preventing us from traveling to the countries and providing on the ground support. So we are basically holding various technical webinars with country stakeholders where we do these modeling exercises in detail. We've done that successfully already for several countries such as Gabon and Niger, and work is ongoing for Cameroon, for Mali, and for all countries of the Central African Power Pool. So I do believe this is a pioneering approach that we're showcasing here, allowing also to reduce emissions related to flying and aviation in supporting countries with energy planning. So with that, I'd like to close. Thank you very much for your attention, and obviously I'll be happy to answer any questions now or towards the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sterl. We're now joined by Mr. Koen Peters, who's the Executive Director of the GOGLA, the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association, which is based right here in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Of course, that is representing a specific parts within renewables, the standalone off-grid systems. You're welcome, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Arne. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak here at this interesting webinar. So I will talk you through my presentation on where we stand with the off-grid solar energy industry. My name is Koen Peters. I'm the Executive Director of GOGLA. So who are we? We are an industry association for the off-grid solar energy industry, and we're here to help our members develop sustainable and buoyant and profitable industry. The sector that we talk about is made up from solar lanterns to solar home systems to standalone off-grid productive use appliances such as solar water pumps and solar refrigeration and community and street lighting. We do not touch on mini grids. We have another industry association around that, which is called the African Mini Grid Developers Association, which we align frequently. We are speaking a little bit about the more larger scale commercial and industrial scale off-grid solar, but most of our work is really focused on the households, the SMEs, and the farmers as end users of our products. We've got around, actually this slide is dated, we are now close to 200 members. 70% of them are what we call our industry members. They commercially trade in off-grid solar products and services, and the others are investors and trade bodies and think tanks. And FMO, who presented earlier, Maite, is one of those members. So here you see a slide with the volume of products that have been sold throughout more or less the existence of Gogla. Gogla was formed in 2012 on the back of the IFC Lighting Global program, which started in 2008. This market had, of course, builds on the shoulders of people that have been selling in rural areas off-grid solar products and components for decades already, particularly in Kenya and India. There have been pioneers for a long time, but the real volume has really started in 2010, 2012, and since then it has had a fairly aggressive growth. And at the moment, the companies that report to us, that's about 100 companies that report every half year, they combined sell between 8 and 9 million products a year. That's not the full market. It's a bit tricky to establish what that full market is. We think that our sales cover about 30% of the total market sales, and a bigger share of the larger product, and a smaller share of the solar lantern market. COVID, of course, had an impact on our markets. We've reported already sales for the first half of 2020, where we saw a decline of 26% in the total market. Asia being much harder hit in its sales than East Africa. West Africa actually not affected, but that's covering up large differences between countries, where some countries saw actually growth and others saw a steep decline. We will report data for the second half of 2020 in about a month's time, and we already know that this will show a partial recovery of the market, but still not to the full level of 2019. So overall, we'll expect to arrive somewhere at around 7 million products sold on an annual basis. And if I go back to that slide, you'll see that's a decline of the height of 2019, but it's more or less a stabilization of where we were. And hopefully from there we will pick up the markets and growth quickly again. So this is another slide on the impact of COVID. The majority of companies saw steep declines of sales. There were some that also saw an increase of their sales throughout the COVID period. We also did research among customers on their ability to pay, and what we saw there is that many customers were prioritizing the repayment of their off-grid solar home systems, sometimes even foregoing food expenses or dipping into savings or dipping into borrowing from customers. But by and large, the payments from customers for paying off the solar home systems has been stayed on a good level. Here's a slide with investment trends that we've seen in the industry. You saw steep growth from 2014 to 2016. To our disappointment, we've seen a stagnation of that growth since then. We had actually hoped that 2020 would show a new growth from the 2018 record. COVID, of course, threw a significant spanner in that work. We were glad that in the end it was still on par with 2019, a few million higher. And again, we hope that the growth will pick up again in next year. And if you speak to our members, for them, COVID as a factor that was hindering their sales and their operations has ceased. That has already passed in the fall of 2020. But they're concerned about how COVID has an impact on the investors that they will need to tap in for the market. And our market is also still very much dependent on development finance institutions such as FMOs and impact investors, and those have been also hit in their budgets by COVID, particularly where they need to rely on donor funding from the government funding. Bit of text here on my slides. What we see as main constraints in our market, the market has of course grown pretty fast, but it's clearly not where we think it could be if all those barriers have been removed. We see that investment is still very much concentrated in the top 10 companies. It's also concentrated in a few market countries. And we find that there's a lot of, there's a long list of smaller companies with sales below 5 million or 1 million even, that have big difficulties in accessing equity financing and startup financing. We see that companies are experiencing growth pressure from their investors and from donors who want the market to scale up very fast to address the sustainable development goals and address energy access very quickly, whereas the companies themselves, while growing quickly, need also to balance that growth against profitability and performance. We also observe that the industry is still not able to demonstrate its performance sufficiently to investors, making it difficult for investors, particularly more traditional investors such as local banks, to step into the market and to understand the risks. We see that even though our market makes it far more affordable for end users to get an energy access, still ability to pay is a big constraint for our market. So the topic about end user subsidies, demand side subsidies, to make it easier for particularly very remote and very poor customers to access our products, is a very live discussion in our industry. As we've grown so steeply over the last decades, we've also now firmly on the radar of many governments as part of their energy access plans and strategies. And we are becoming more and more a partner for governments to talk about regulation and policies to support that market. But if you look where we stand, and in many countries, the policy and regulatory environment is still not very favorable, and even some countries that have been very good, such as Kenya, are sometimes reversing on some factors, such as VAT and import duties. Then there's also an influx of low quality products where we need to work with governments around regulation and control measures to monitor and push back, make sure that our end users have a good experience. Also to reduce e-waste, of course, makes a lot of difference if a product lives for 4 years or for 4 weeks. And as a whole, we think as a sector, we need to be more bold and confident about speaking about ourselves and speak outside the industry in a value-led discussion. Make sure that we become on the radar of the ministries of finance and not just the Ministry of Energy and the broader public for the values that we bring, not just for energy as such. Beyond the solar home system and solar lanterns, we see an emerging market for off-grid solar appliances such as solar water pumps, fans, televisions that go with solar home systems, refrigeration units. And we definitely are speaking for that industry as well. And that's of course a special element of this market, where the service of electricity and the consumption of that electricity in appliances that provide, in the end, the services that household needs, is so connected in the services being brought to households. Here, for example, we see some slides, a slide here on televisions, which has shown a steady growth throughout the last few years. And we expect that trend to definitely continue. What we also see is that customers that once started with buying a small solar home system sufficient to power a radio and charge a mobile phone and a few lanterns in their household could also be very good clients to be elevated and then buy a larger system that can power a television or go to a larger television system or whatever, or take other services from the company which are being connected, such as financial services or buying a phone against a customer credit. And we think that this is going to provide interesting dynamics in the business models. We talk about a new utility business models for companies that sell different sizes of systems and make sure that they can serve that customer journey towards higher capacity needs. We also talk about beyond energy business models where the off-grid solar home system is an asset that can be used against which to finance other services such as loans and insurance. So let me close off with a slide on the vision that we work towards and that we hope that many companies and donors and stakeholders rally behind, is that we are working towards a vision of 1 billion lives impacted with off-grid solar, small-scale solar by 2030, and set a target for ourselves that in 2024, we'd like to make sure that we have a buoyant, profitable industry with that's being seen across the planet as a very respectful and impactful industry.
Thanks for that, and other questions can be asked towards the end. We're now joined by Mr. Sonny Boateng. He's the CEO of Aprisolar. Thank you for being with us today. Could you kindly introduce to us your company?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite. It's good to see that private entities are also represented on the panel. I am the Chief Executive Officer for Aprisolar. Aprisolar is focused on developing renewable energy projects in Latin America and Africa. We so far have an energy pipeline of about close to 1.8 gigawatts in primarily Africa that are in different stages of development, that being early stage development to much later stage, which means that we are almost ready to build, pending securing financing and financial partners to come on board. We have decided at the end of 2019 going into 2020, when we looked at the demand and need, that Africa was a primary focus market for us when we started off somewhere in 2017. We were able to generate quite a lot of traction in Latin America, where we have over 2.6 gigawatts in the pipeline. We've managed to structure a deal that's pending construction, which is, due to confidentiality matters, I can't mention, but that's also that's over 128 megawatts in Latin America. So we've got quite a significant traction. Our teams are based in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands. We also have a very small team in the Dominican Republic and in South Africa. So that is a little bit about Aprisolar and who I am.
Thank you very much for that. Of course, you've listened to the previous speakers. Are there already some insights which you found which can immediately be applied by your company?
No, 100%. I mean, I thought that Maite's presentation or her talk was quite interesting as to where the focus markets are. I did have a number of points that I wanted to run through, because we do believe that the issue of energy is a macro problem in Africa, right? Maite already mentioned it as being 600 million people that need energy. Now, I'm not seeing that as a nice to have. We've actually determined it as a necessity. I mean, what has exacerbated this is the problem with COVID, and it's one of the biggest global pandemics that we've had in our lifetime anyway. If you look, I've recently been to Africa, to Ghana, met with a number of entrepreneurs who I hope have joined us today, and we actually visited one of the more interesting factories, discussing what that factory can do for the community. The community isn't big to put a 2 megawatt solar plant there. However, the lack of energy was really impacting livelihoods. So micro grids was a solution that we were discussing, focusing on how that factory could be the major consumer of the plant. So we were looking at localized energy. We think that that is the future. We think that microgrids from the perspective of looking at what can you generate as in economic drivers. I think Elsie mentioned that earlier as well. There has to be a focused economic driver within that community that can allow you to put an energy infrastructure there and boot and support the rest of the community. The consumption isn't, I mean, you know, it's in some places it's less than 20% of what we consume here, right? There was an example given, I think, in a report that I read about a year ago that said, you know, there's some places, households in Africa that use about as much energy in a year as we do to boil our coffee or tea in a day, right? So, sorry, in a week. So I think it's important for us to look at a different approach when it comes to energy in Africa. I think it has to be decentralized. I think it has to be local. And I think that you need to look at work with the local community or government to discuss about what kind of economic drivers can you implement to support that energy infrastructure that you're actually putting in place. Right. So we had good conversations with the Ghanaian governments, with local governments in Ghana, but also with local businesses, because I think that those are the drivers that's going to help us give a bankable project to people like Maite when we
exactly, that was going to be my next question, Sonny, because of course, when you want to build like a massive hydro dam or field of windmills, there is larger investments. It's all relatively easier for a big financial institution to finance that than all those, as you say, localized energy facilities in rural Africa. But do you think is your company able to get finances for those projects and to find the investors?
Yeah, so it's a massive challenge. I mean, I don't think the global community outside of Africa understands how desperate the problem is. So we are not thinking outside of how we've structured energy in the developed world. I think that, first of all, we need to sit down and look at the need, right, and how Africa is structured from a community-based perspective and also economically, and rethink how we financially support energy infrastructure. It has to be completely redone. And I think one of the models, right, is because we can't find a financial partner to finance $1 million worth of a megawatt, right? It's very, very difficult to do. But I think $1 million aggregated could become, you know, sustainable from a financial bankability perspective, right? So if you look at 50 different projects, and it's doable. There's over 200. I mean, if we take, for instance, what the Ghanaian government has proposed, as in one district, one factory, there's close to 300 districts, right? So if you were then to discuss, well, how do we take half of this, right, and then aggregate it into one project? Yeah, the legalities, you know, and the lawyers and have to come in, and there's couple of intricacies that you would have to resolve, but you would have a off-taker, or you would have a number of off-takers with one guarantee, and potentially that could be something that is bankable. I do fundamentally think it has to be re-looked at how we finance it, how the legal structures are done. We have looked at a country in Africa that is using, so you do have an off-taker agreement and then a government supporting document as well. Those kind of out-of-the-box solutions, I think, is the way to look at infrastructure in Africa. These large DFIs and the days when you could put up, 200, 400 megawatts in certain countries in Africa. I think Elsie mentioned that the infrastructure to actually disseminate that energy is quite weak and needs to be looked at. We participated, we nearly participated in a project in Namibia where the tender before the generation tender was issued was to actually resolve some of the infrastructure problem. infrastructure is going to be something that is already being looked at in the European context. There's already documentation out with regards to EVs and their impact and how much money is required. I don't know whether that is being done to that level in Africa on a governmental level, looking at 20, 25 years ahead, or whether we're looking at election cycles. So there's a few things that needs to be done in terms of a long-term plan for it.
Exactly. Mr. Boateng, thank you very much. I'd like to leave it there for now, but there's still going to be a Q&A very shortly, so then also feel free to pitch in. But we have one more speaker. I already see some questions coming in through the chat, so please keep them coming, and we'll get to that shortly. But not before we hear from Mr. Willem van der Merwe. He's the founder and director of Amphibious Energy, which is actually a brand new NABC member since this week. Thank you very much for that. Great to have you on board in the NABC network. Could you kindly start by giving a brief introduction of your company, sir?
Hi, thank you, Arne. Yeah, thank you for the invite. And yes, we've been in and out and supporting and helping NABC over the last few years, but it's actually now that we finally have signed up, to be an NABC member, which is really great for us to be part of this. Yes, so from ourselves, we're Amphibious Energy. So we are focusing on solving a bit of a problem from the bottom up. So not, jumping in to see how we can solve the global problem of big energy. But for us, it was about, making the renewable energy transportable so that we can start moving into supporting the diesel rental markets with alternatives. That's why we've designed basically what we call the energy pods, so a transportable package of wind, solar, batteries, plug and play, all in one, that can replace your diesel gen sets in the really off-grid environments. So that's basically, Arne, what our focus is and what we're doing. We're an innovative new company, moving into scale up. So that's basically where we're at now.
Right. So, I mean, we've heard this coming up a couple of times before. Also, Sonny mentioned it. For example, Ghana, they're saying we want in every district a factory, localized smaller power plants. Have you seen growth in your line of business in the recent years? Is there a lot of interest for this type of products?
Well, yes. So what we've seen, especially with the COVID, is that we had quite a few projects that was in the pipeline for last year, and that's all been pushed back or set up to a later stage. Also, what we found is, the key personnel and people in the companies that we had conversations with and we were leading the projects were either made redundant or moved to another projects, so there was sort of a bit of issues and interests in this type of technology, but then it's always coming down eventually to the costs of it as well. New tech, innovative tech is always going to have a bit of a price tag with that. And what we found, and I think some of our speakers here already, Koen, I think have mentioned this as well, that it's hard for innovative startups, new technology, actually to get a stepping stone in the market, and especially within Africa. It seems like the investments, the FMOs and the World Banks and the Bill Gates and all these big foundations has a tendency to really invest, but they really invest in only substantial, larger companies, which have proven technology, years of experience with them to bring that into the African market. But there's a lot of small companies, small entities, here in the Dutch sector, we've got a significant amount of innovations, and especially over this last year, coming to the forefront, that can support in small scale towards the big scale as well, for the Africa market in various sites. One thing, for instance, that I've missed in the conversations and in the energy mix is actually hydrogen. Hydrogen is becoming more and more the bigger focus of energy here, especially in the Western and the European countries. But hydrogen still needs to be created. And especially, focus on the green hydrogen created by renewables. Is Africa in a phenomenal position to be, well, I've grown up that Africa might be one day actually the breadbasket of the world, but it seriously can be also be the energy source of the world as well.
Right. Willem, thank you very much for that. I do see actually a lot of the questions coming in. Let's go there, but before, maybe, because actually I'd like to make the connection already between what you said and what was mentioned before. Of course, we still have FMO on the line, I believe. Is there a possibility, Maite, you could respond to the fact that it is, to what extent do you think you could be, as FMO, investing in smaller project, as Willem said, rather than only the big one? Would there be possibilities for that, or would you do that through third parties, for example?
Well, Arne, just probably because before I didn't really mention, we didn't talk about the strategy of FMO, right? Until today, practically most of our portfolio is large IPPs, and only around 20% is on transmission and distribution and distributed energy. However, going forward, FMO has realized that renewable energy is becoming the standard. It's the bread and butter for many other institutions, and there is no innovation, right, to be done. So we are moving towards as well to investments in transmission and distribution, battery storage as well. We're looking at hydrogen solutions. I think I agree personally with Willem. However, I think we're not there yet, but I see as well for the private sector, even the mining, that green hydrogen might be a solution already because of the cost of diesel in the middle of nowhere, right? And, and solar is practically radiation of 4,000 hours, like in South Africa in certain regions. So we are really open to small companies nowadays as well. Koen knows we have been supporting a lot of the companies in the solar home system, and we have made investment as little as 3 million, but it's painful. I have to be honest with that. It takes us as well sometimes saying energy as a 50 million, and you need to balance, right? We need to create a portfolio that is diversified, but distributed energy and new technologies are becoming a key market for FMO. We expect that, of course, in 2040, so to have at least 50% of our portfolio renewables and 50% basically moving into the new segments. Because you can have a large IPP, but if you cannot connect it, it doesn't really matter what you have there, right? So we are as well productive use is also another area that we want to get involved in. And we're looking at solutions, how to innovate with developers, but it takes time. But we are really open now to be more innovative. I think we have been always the innovative bank within the DFIs, but nowadays even more than ever, because we don't really want to compete on pricing on IPPs. Everybody is already a substantial amount of capital in the market for those, for the normal IPPs.
Right. Thanks a lot for that, Maite. Let's just go back to Mr. van der Merwe. Maybe you could finalize by giving us some ideas about which market you're going to be active in and where your focus is going to be on in the coming years before we go to the Q&A, because I see actually there's several questions that have come in. But what would be your focus market? Where do you see most opportunities for the coming years?
Well, let's say, for instance, all the projects, even the mini grid projects that need to be installed and need to be set up. It's so interesting, we had also here in Europe with offshore wind, all the installations. But during the installations and the processes of that, they all use diesel gen sets, to do the work for them, so they're using the black or the dirty energy still to install, the renewables. And this is where our focus will be, is try to support that part of the business, to see whether we can support actually the bigger entities with their smaller power that they require. Then the other focus that we have is really in the off-grid, where, disasters, when disasters hit, for instance, a year or two ago when Mozambique was hit by that big cyclone. These units of ours can be either dropped by helicopter or by a truck and really then in an area where nothing is reachable, and provide then power and necessity power, for the community's survival during those times. So it's about really the off-grid, really the remote areas, also local support and water filtrations, within these units of ours, we can put in water filtration systems that simultaneous times pumps cleaner water, for the communities as well. So it is just solving that smallest problems arising where we still need to drag in the diesel gen sets everywhere in these off-grid markets, and that's where we will focus, stepping in now.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. van der Merwe of Amphibious Energy. I would like to thank not only you, but all the speakers we had today for being here in this webinar, or Africa Business Club, as we would call it. For now, I'd like to thank you all for participating today, and I wish you a wonderful rest of today.